So the Supply Chain Security Working Group has been focusing mainly on how do we map industry standards to TCG technologies. We've noticed there's a big gap between people understanding what TCG technologies are and how you can integrate them, and how in many cases they're already in your system. An example is a TPM. A TPM can be part of your IT infrastructure, it can be part of your BYODs. And what we're looking at is how do we help customers ensure they're activating the right securities and that they have it at the hardware base level. So with the TPM as an example, which is your trusted platform module, this is not necessarily known by everyone. It's only the IT infrastructure team generally who understands what it is. We are working to make things more user friendly so that when compliance comes in and your IT support systems come in, they know that this technology is within the hardware platform. They can activate it using a software, a SaaS-based platform. There isn't one dedicated one. Mostly it's in-house, it's inbuilt. And there's guidance from TCG on how to do that. So TCG has the technology of how do I build it, but also how do I monitor it. So we're trying to show there's technologies there, there's platforms there, they're free, they don't cost anything. Use these resources, go in, identify if you have a TPM in your environment within all of your infrastructure, how do I activate it, how do I monitor it? Why is that important? Because that helps you with asset management. Asset management is key when it comes to overall standard IT compliance, information security management systems, and also supply chain security, obviously. How do we know what assets are out there? How are we managing our assets and monitoring them on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? So we're trying to bridge that gap of the technology is there. How do we get it to everybody so that they understand I can implement it and it's beneficial to me, and I can tell my customers I've got a good asset management plan in place and this is how I monitor them. So with that, we go into the different standards that are out there. So you've got your baseline, which is ISO 27001, which, as I said, is the ISMS, security management governance. With that, that's your basic IT corporate level security. So you have a company, your company has a secure network, a secure infrastructure because you're monitoring your TPM, utilizing the TPM if you have it. Now, you may not have a TPM. There might be other technologies or guidance from TCG that's there that you can use. DICE is another one. We've got Cyrus capabilities, which encapsulate a lot of these different technologies. So there's all that guidance there. So how do we map that and say at IT governance level, how can I implement these technologies so that they map to these standards? So you have standards, but you also have industry best practices and alignment. So you don't have to go out and get an ISO 27001 certification necessarily for your company. You can align to it. And these technologies will help you show as an evidence to your customers when your customers send you a questionnaire saying, how do I know you're secure? How do I know your supply chain is secure? Well, you can say, well, we've got an asset inventory. We monitor everything that we get in from our suppliers, and we're also monitoring our own IT infrastructure at the same time. So we're mapping it to ISO 27001 as a base. That's your good basic corporate IT infrastructure. But you've also got supply chain, which is ISO 28001. That's your supply chain best practices within the ISO, within the International Standards Organization. Not as well known, but it is out there. Again, all the ISO standards are how do I do things? What's expected of me? So you've got the ISO standards 27001, 28000 for supply chain security, monitoring your suppliers, managing your suppliers. After that, you have to understand how do I implement these controls? So as we said, we've got TPM tech, we've got the TCG technologies. We then go over to the NIST controls. So NIST is the American framework of all the controls. So you've NIST 853. Sorry, it's NIST 853 version 5, which is basically a Bible of all the controls that you can implement and how to do it, what's looked for within those categories. So you can map your ISO 27000, all your ISO, be it 27001 or 28000. You can map that to your NIST, and it will tell you what controls to put in there, and that'll help you know where to start, because many times you're not sure. You'll be told this is what you should do, but you're like, how do I do it? So we're mapping those. So we've got that mapping complete. Now, it's not a huge base of controls because it's only supply chain right now that we're focusing on. But TCG technologies are relevant in all areas in that respect, but we're just in this one scoping area. The EU CRA, which is the EU Cyber Resilience Act, yeah, the EU CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act. Sorry. So with that, this is new, but many of the controls and the expectations within that requirement can be mapped to NIST controls, which helps you because you can go back into your inventory and say, so you've got your inventory of assets, I have all these assets and this control maps to this NIST, which maps to the EU CRA. So we've been doing that mapping. So people have a starting point. You've also got NIST 2 out there, which is also a mandatory requirement coming out. So with all of these mappings, we're showing that there's a secure baseline within every environment. So you've got the IT environment where you're working today, and your suppliers are going to be part of your IT requirement. And through your asset management and monitoring those suppliers within your environment, that's your supply chain managed in that sense. There's also the other supply chain areas where when a component is being built, and this is also where when we talk, we'll come back to the TPM on this. The TPM has a secure architecture build that TCG developed over the years, I think over 25 years ago. And what's great about that is if I go into one of my suppliers and they're a TPM supplier, perhaps, I'm building a device and I need a TPM in there. If I go to a supplier and I see, or a company, and I see they've got a TPM, they're building it for us. One part is we go in for the SDLC, which is the Secure Development Lifecycle. Really, really important. How are they building it? Have they got security built in while they're developing the process? So this is where if I see a supplier with a TPM and that TPM is certified by TCG through common criteria, that helps me know that that supplier or that company is secure, has a secure security infrastructure and maturity in place. They understand security and they're able to show it to me because this can be verified through the common criteria. And many times common criteria platforms are sponsored by their governments, by, Japan's common criteria is sponsored by the Japanese government. So that lets me know, good, they are continuously and rigorously being audited and they're using the right requirements when they're building and security is built in. So me, myself, I'm specifically driving the mapping for the EU CRA controls because right now, I believe September 11th, 2026, there are mandatory requirements in there that any products that are sold within the EU must comply with. So you cannot sell, depending on what your product is, you may not be able to sell it within the EU if it is not compliant with the EU CRA. So that's where it's a good kind of starting point to say, okay, what are the supply chain security controls within that are expected within that group of controls within the EU CRA? So we've been working on that and we've given good guidance on that. We've been able to map it to TCG technologies and how they can be beneficial. We're trying to talk with auditors, IT auditors in the industry so that we're educating them and saying, are you aware that these technologies are there? If you look at a risk register when you're going in and you're auditing your supplier and they've got because when you're auditing an the IT infrastructure, which will include your supply chain, you you need to make sure the auditors understand what they're looking at. So if an auditor goes in and sees that the first thing they have to do is ask for a risk register. Really important. Risk register should always have a component in there for supply chain. How am I managing risk within my supply chain? How am I mitigating risk? And we're educating suppliers, we're educating auditors on if you see a TPM technology in the risk register saying this is a risk with a supplier. How do we monitor the supplier? Well, we've activated the TPM asset management, or we've activated other TCG technologies, or we're aligned to TCG technologies and best practices. That shows a level of of maturity again that we were talking about, that that this company will understand security and is monitoring best practices in the industry and implementing them to mitigate risk. So so right now for me, I'm trying to educate at that level. Because so many times people aren't aware of all these technologies that they have within their system, and it's a big gap, and we're just trying to talk to everybody about that and say TCG is there. There's technologies that may already be within your infrastructure that you can perhaps activate. We can't tell you how to activate them. It's up to you, but we can provide guidance on how to build it if you needed to. So remember, we're a nonprofit, which is great. So it's educating the customer, first of all, that you have these technologies. This is how you would activate these technologies, and they're beneficial to you long term to mitigate risk. But also educating auditors coming in, and big companies coming in auditing, or certifying certification bodies, who would provide ISO certification at different levels, or CMNC certifications, or SOC 2 reports, saying if you see these technologies in there, you'll be able to get the information from them, get the evidence from them, and you'll see a level of security in there that will increase perhaps their rating when they're being audited.